A band of strangers came into the land and told the people that they were there to liberate them. But they were not. Oh, they seemed to be, but they were not. They were agents of the mind, and thus perforce conveyors of a new captivity. A useful reminder, perhaps. The simple take blunt news to be bad news. Now for some flat-out sounding good news. One man says he's now to the place that were it not for his metaphorical thinking, he wouldn't even have any thinking worth thinking about. Being apparently intrigued by how he had conducted himself thus far as a passenger on the mythical express, Life sat down beside this one man and offered him a deal, quoting, "If you'll get off now, I'll make it possible for you to sometimes feel as though you are a giant living amongst pygmies. During those times that you can't pull it off, you won't find existence very pleasant, but what else is new? Plus, at least part of the time, you're assured of feeling superior and special. So what'll it be?" There have been those who said that life does have a perverse sense of humor, though they never said it to its face. Or if they did, there's no record of it. Some news from the war room. If you can only defend yourself by attacking someone else, you can't be defended. Question: how can you tell a mystic mentally from everyone else, besides the fact that he doesn't give a damn one way or the other about the things that interest them? One man said, "I'm sick of it," and replied, "Not near as much as me, my friend, not near as much as me." For lunch, instead of peanut butter and jelly, one kid asked if he could have some peanut butter and an answer. Okay, pretend time. If it were a combat, and you let the dance make you tense, they win. In his reading, a man came upon this sentence. Under quite routine conditions, simple observation of the two simultaneously will reveal that at any given moment it is almost as though man's body and his mind live two separate lives in two separate worlds. He stopped and considered this and thought, if this is true, then an awareness of it could be of great benefit to my life. And he further thought, but if I am correct, then my not being aware of it should have had a detrimental effect on my life up till now. But as I sit here thinking about it, for the life of me, I can't see how it particularly has. He later concluded that the episode had been profitable in causing him to newly reflect on the general construction of man and the operational reality of his assumed self-consciousness. Clue number 92, how to tell a real mystic from those still groping. Above all, a real mystic enjoys what he's doing. So much so that even if he fails, he couldn't stop even if he told himself he should. By the way, in response to a new batch of letters that have come in from viewers asking what authority or what right did I say a mystic does this or a mystic would believe that. Well, I think it's time for me to repeat again publicly to take note. For those of you who haven't heard it, it was in my last expedition. I was in the northeast corner, right at the border of Ecuador. In fact, part of it was over into Pakistan. That I discovered a heretofore totally unknown, it was completely grown over, it had just never been known, it was a prehistoric Norse civilization, which therein I discovered this collection of notes and etc. having to do with a mystic, and thus such as this, for those of you who haven't heard, I'm just simply here as a reporter, is the point. You know, from these notes. And okay. Well, I don't mind. I should bring that up every now and then. All right, back to the news. After having addressed them for some time, life finally turned to a group of humans. But I could go on, and one of them said, "We're hip." A city traffic cop standing at one of the major urban mental intersections gave his take on efforts to abandon the established roadways. Ticket fixing, I calls it, mere attempts at ticket fixing. The evolutionary sequential relationship between what a man understands and what he says as portrayed by way of one chap's haberdashery. Loose pants, no underwear. Loose pants, loose underwear. Loose pants, tight underwear. Tight pants, tight underwear. Tight pants, no underwear. What ordinary things and ideas are actually important to a person attempting to extend their own consciousness? Well, one such man made himself up a list of such things, and it started out with 43 entries. And for some time he pondered, reflected, ruminated, and thought about each of the subjects until he decided that the list could be shortened. He then began such an effort and found it surprisingly easy and appropriate to delete many of the items he had originally believed absolutely necessary of inclusion. Well, he finally had the list down to fewer than 10 subjects and was suspecting that it might even come to much, much less than that when he either died or woke up. It's not for me to say, it's your call. In the normal land of silliness, only one thing can stand up to seriousness: originality of thought. A man in the penthouse, looking around at his children, then at the people on the lower floors, stopped and wondered, why has it turned out like this? What purpose is being served? And why do I not more often look around in this manner and become so struck? From a mystic's notebook. Only when in that blissful moment is a man truly at peace, and when not, only is life tolerable when he is struggling to be so. As local conditions passed some kids on the corner, it said, don't forget, guys, the most important thing is to stay hip and be part of whatever is currently hot and happening. And one of them shouted back, what the hell you think we are, sheep or something? Cliche update. God is not in the details. Editing is. No. Another mark of original thought would be its non-interference in the normal flow of consciousness. Save yourself some time in the definition minds of ontology and metaphysics. Reality is simply what the mind makes of life. Period. That's it. Like the box containing nothing, which when opened swallows the place in which it exists, life fully found and freed consumes the reality that had confined it. A certain man living in a city high-rise discovered an unknown elevator shaft running the distance between top and bottom. Then off by himself he pondered what might be its purpose, why its existence was not common knowledge, then ultimately came to seriously study how he might make profitable use of it. On his 40th birthday, looking in the mirror at what he considered to be his sorry self, the man said to reflection, yeah, I know what you're thinking. And his consciousness replied, so what took you so long? Which was not the direction he'd expected the incident to take. How to spot a mystic. He's the one who never bothers himself with the inevitable. Next question. Could it be that he's the only one who can recognize it? Thank you, and please shine your bowling shoes before returning them to the counter. Thank you. Once, in an unauthorized move, local conditions on this one planet unilaterally attempted to start a new religion based on the slogan, a happy man is a stupid man. And even though life normally engages in serious frowning regarding such freelance activities, in this instance it went so well that it was soon adopted in various altered forms for use on many other worlds. The unwritten patriotic code of city consciousness. We stare, yes, we stare. We regret that we have but one awareness to give to our immediate vicinity. Didn't know we had so many people here from New Hampshire or Vermont. Your body can protect you from physical harm, but what's looking out for your mind? Well, I'll tell you what should be: originality of thought. A trekker asked a guide, "Is it better to live on the mountains or in the valleys?" "It's best," he replied, "to be able to go where you want to." One man says that when he started this adventure, he used to go looking for metaphors, but now they come looking for him. How, even if your diploma was lost last time you moved, to prove that you're an expert? You can only speak authoritatively regarding things you don't understand. Local conditions came to this one guy and said, "Look, if you're going to keep being this stupid, we're going to have to charge you an extra $12 a day." Physically, life just happens. And so too does it mentally to those not original in their thinking. Though it has been said that the purpose of all spiritual efforts is to die before you die, note how little is then said concerning the matter of living before you die. It seems only a wrangle of semantics to those still mired in words. Just because you yell something up or down the dumb waiter doesn't make it true or useful. A man asked a mystic, if ordinary people knew what was going on, would they be pleased with the knowledge or frightened by it? Why don't you ask them? Looking out the window at trees, clouds, and little woody creatures, a man was so struck. Considering how absolutely amazing is human thinking compared to everything else here, makes you wonder what ability life itself possesses compared to us. From the Transcendental Entertainer's Guidebook. Don't call yourself a songwriter unless you write at least 30 new songs every day. In case you haven't already thought about it. One way life keeps those expanding their consciousness from going too far is by making them stay somewhat annoyed at those who aren't. Forget the moral injunctions against them. The fact is there's simply no stable basis on which to construct criticism, sarcasm, or irony. Regarding originality of thought, one of the problems, if you want to call it that, I do. Okay. Part of the trickiness regarding originality of thought is that if you can't do it, you got no idea what it is. It's rumored that on certain trains the conductors are secretly laughing at all the riders. Well, all the regular riders. Now for a change, a proverb update from life's viewpoint. If life couldn't have thought, it would have had to invent man. The curious case of a genetic train that made it from Paris down there to Spain. You can free your mind, but not your behind. A friendly urban reminder. In the city, your intellectual credentials can wane if your denial of the obvious begins to falter. One attraction of booze and drugs is that they make limited awareness seem acceptable. You owe me $1. Well, since they cut our funds here on PBS, it's nice I can make a little money on the side with these wagers, as to which news items, well, as we say. In his backyard, one man found a prehistoric skull, but not to worry, it was his own. In things mental, preference precludes originality. A viewer writes, if you keep talking about originality of thought so much, I may start to believe I know what it is. And won't that be a shame, since I'll be mistaken? Yes, sir, it will. It surely will. Well, being under a punitive directive from the Federal Forest Commission to engage only in truthfulness on the air, I must further add that only those who feel some preference, some dependence on ideas and their understanding thereof can be in any way harmed by their own misinterpretations or by being misled by others, and even then, they can't really be. There was once a man who had personal problems, and to save the expense of counseling, just abandoned his personal. In the land of mice, once appeared one who thought like a cat. He looked like a mouse, but he thought like a cat. Guess what they ended up calling him? A mystic. Since we have never touched on the subject, I thought I'd say something about originality of thought as a kind of mystical approach. You could look at the effort to reach the proclaimed state of enlightenment, to awaken one's consciousness or ignite it to some higher level, all of those descriptions. You could look at that, not incorrectly, as being a struggle against all predictability. Remember, we're speaking mentally now. The only place that is profitable for a man to apply his efforts in this regard, and the only place where it is possible to achieve any result. Anything that you want to do physically of making yourself look better, stronger, thinner, fatter is one thing. But insofar as that having any effect on, any direct effect on anything other than that, is la-la land. Dreamville. You are pursuing the great guru of whatever his name is, Zippy the Pinhead. I was wondering if there's any danger in bringing up that subject. So we're talking about areas mental when I say predictable. And again, I might point out how widespread it is for people to attempt to do that which seems to be surprising, or they might want to say unpredictable, in a physical manner, even under the guise of making some metaphysical, mystical effort. Most common being to adopt new ways to dress, to change your appearance in some dramatic fashion, that if the locale in which you live, everyone shaves their head, you let your hair grow. If everyone there lacerates their face and paints colors on it, then you go nude and plain. Very old, very common. They still do it in ways that apparently would strike one due to habit, which is predictability, but due to habit you're not that familiar, or you're not that struck by it, is that all religions, almost, as they get beyond a very fundamental stage and they get beyond any limited appeal to just the extremely simple, which also ties in with the practitioners of said religion's ability to expend greater amounts of funds than is required for bare survival. Follow the sentence. Here we go. Is that even those religions, areas that you find, or that you never think about being out of the ordinary, just consider that even amongst the established conservative religions, Catholicism, Judaism, they all engage in ways physically to try and distinguish themselves, but they are also unwittingly by now, of course, they are attempting to struggle against the predictable, which you could fall into the arms of Captain Irony quite easily if you were simple-minded yourself and of limited perception, by saying, well, they may have started out that way, but not super predictable. Sure, but that's life. But notice you're just used to seeing, whether you're, say, Catholic or not, of seeing men wearing dresses and wearing hats that in fact look like, now I think about that, some of them look like those cone things that maybe they were modeled on Zippy the Pinhead. No offense to our Catholic viewers, because we don't have any. But you're used to seeing that, but besides any other story, just for the attempt to unravel some of the unrecognized mythology of ordinary life, I am telling you that originally people do, on an organized basis, and they'll do it individually. That is still part to physically attempt to engage, to struggle against predictability. That would probably, even though it's synonymous with some of the words they would use, they would probably not use that word in English, but people are still drawn to foreign religions, to cults based upon foreign rituals. To go do something to shave their head, let's just say, everybody knows that's fairly common. Here we see it all throughout Northern Europe, that you've got people at the airport, they shave their head and they put some of the marks that are indicative of the Hindu cults and faiths and the cultural aspects of Hinduism. And they can explain it in all sorts of ways. But part of what they're doing, without even knowing it, and whatever effect it had, if any, is extremely short-lived. If they decide they're going to take up with this cult that shaves their head, or they dress a new way, or you got to put marks on your face, or you got to wear some kind of big, but you do something that's going to make the people in your vicinity go and look. In the beginning, whether it's explained that way or whether those involved have any understanding of it, it is in a sense a struggle against the predictable, and the person doing it can get some nourishment, not physical. They can get a bit of nourishment the first time that they shave their head, do these strange marks on their face, and go out in public where that is not the expected in that area. It's not necessary and it can't be guaranteed, but surely you people understand that it is possible to get a certain kind of enthusiasm, a certain kind of non-physical nourishment over being able to get out in public and survive the looks, and even if some people may give you taunts or whatever. You understand. But then it's gone. It's not going to last any time whatsoever. But I was simply pointing out that the struggle against predictability is known within the neural framework of life, and it filters into men, but collectively, the way it comes out, it is not a direct attempt to work on the predictability vis-a-vis the mind. In fact, contrary, as I've pointed out before, maybe I'll hit in a minute, but contrary, it is seen as being detrimental. Because from an ordinary view to say that someone is unpredictable in their thinking, that their mental operations are unpredictable, is down there a clinical definition of at least paranoia. It's mental instability. You are not a normal person if you're a normal person doing this, which is why you've got to be extraordinary to start doing it. See, I weaseled everyone right out of that at no additional charge. All of the struggles, the basis of all religions, but more specifically, all of the attempts to do something extraordinary with one's consciousness could be described as a struggle against the predictable. Another place I might have used something else, but it is much always and still is. It is a struggle against the predictable. That is the attempt fight against evil at awakening. That is the search for enlightenment, and etc. It is a struggle against predictability. Then, if you see it, predictability is the epitome, the exemplary epitome of the unoriginal. But as always, to make it interesting, you are left with somewhat of, you can put somewhat in where you want to in your pocket or parentheses, a conundrum. But let me also point out while we're here, and it seems to be not lacking in some presence even between us here in this time and place, but the historical traces of what appears to be, after the fact at least, humor that runs through, not religion, they take care of that, but through much of the mystical, so-called mystical writings, as they've been labeled after the fact, that there seems to be humor of some kind. Now, if we take into account that the people involved, like many of the old Sufi stories, the Zen stories, they're much harder to find, I'll grant you this, in the Judaic-Christian tradition. I'll leave it to you as to why. No, I won't. I'll tell you. No, you figure it out. It's not of any great importance. But anyway, I'm sure all of you know that there is a certain amount of humor that once you get into written records that apparently would be closer, purport to be closer, seem to be closer to some actual mystical tradition of the past, something of a more limited and more specific nature than organized religion. Anyway, their stories, their dialogues, through which run a continual stream of humor. And as I said, it's here I've noticed several times, you can't hide it, but on many nights I hear people laugh at something, some news item that I read or something I said. Now, under such conditions, if we take out, as I point out at ordinary levels, what is always involved is a certain kind of aggression in all ordinary humor. So we'll delete that. We will simply assume that if it's some Zen monk or some Sufi telling a story, or some Hindu or some Christian mystic, Jewish mystic, if they're telling some story or they're responding to some question, and it even hundreds, thousands of years later, it makes you laugh, and it's obvious that the people there surely laughed. Now we'll delete the hostility, because if indeed if he did know what he's talking about, there was not hostility in it. So forget that part, even though we've been through that. Then the question would be, why does it make people laugh? It can't be an absolute surprise to whatever monk, whatever Zen master or Sufi told the story to somebody or made the comment. It obviously could not have been a surprise that he knew that it was very likely that the person would laugh. But also, let me give you my assurance that that was not the purpose. I mean, if just making people laugh was the purpose, somebody doing this would be in a comedy club. You'd be actually in showbiz rather than this, if that was the attempt. It is not to make people laugh. And so I was going to ask you, having wrapped up those kinds and cauterized a few of those loose ends, that let's take a story. Let's take it as a given, the kinds of common references to Zen monks saying things to Zen students, Zen masters, or Sufis saying things to neophytes, that just was, by all appearances, was a joke. I mean, even though you start out and assume, well, there's some deeper message. What he said was, either the story or one line, he had to know very likely was going to make the people go, ha! All right, so I'm saying there's no hostility. That is, there's no criticism alive. The Zen monk, as just exemplary, is not saying that, criticizing laugh. Now you gotta know that. So there's no hostility. Plus, there's not a surprise. He knows that it's very likely that the person is going to laugh. What is afoot? What is the purpose, and why so? This takes what appears to be humor out of the realm of ordinary humor, if all of my criteria that I just noted are met. Because now it is not to make someone laugh, it is a oblique attack on predictability. Now, if the Zen monk or the Sufi, whoever it is make some comment and is going to pick out an example, he may just be responding, many of the stories go that some student, some interested party says, why does life work in such and such a way? Or why does the king do so and does such and such? Or why does a priest? Why does religion operate this way? Why do the arts? They bring up something in life, is most common. And the more enlightened one goes run, and he gives an answer, and it makes the person laugh. Or you read it thousands of years later, and it makes you chuckle. Now remember, we're assuming that meets my criteria, that the guy doing it, if he is more enlightened, more awake, more conscious, he is not criticizing whatever the subject is. He's not attacking the king. He doesn't give a damn. It's irrelevant. He is not engaged in criticism, sarcasm, cynicism of any kind. So remember that. There's none of that. So the humor, assuming that the story does fit all this, that it's an interested party, someone who can hear something, the Zen monk or the Sufi or the Jewish mystic, recognize there's a possibility that you'll hear something. So he gives them a response that even now makes you laugh, and you realize it made him chuckle probably. It was not a criticism, no cynicism, but it was just no criticism, no hostility or aggression of any kind toward the subject about which he commented that produced the chuckle. That, and it was not to make the person laugh. That was not the purpose. So if those two criteria, in other words, he had another purpose, then it is, what is the purpose? And why do people laugh? of course some of you surely have already put together, it's actually fairly simple. It is that he is fighting the predictable. Since it is not possible under any ordinary conditions for someone who might be more conscious to turn on someone else, no matter how interested, and regardless of how many mail order courses you may have taken from Oral Roberts, to turn around to another person and go, boom, and suddenly they're more conscious. There are many stories about that. How many of them have you ever chuckled at when you heard them? Probably damn few. But does that mean you should not have? I don't know. We'll go into that some other time. I'm going to have to get back down there to the ruins and find some more of those notebooks. Why is it that certain things, those stories, why does it produce a laughter? All right, if you went back now and analyzed it, which if you're hearing of this, you can go back and pick up whatever book you had, and when I say analyze it, just go back and read one without me making up one or trying to remember one. Go back and just read one, and the analyzation should be the same way as a low-level sense of enlightenment as you read and go, oh, yeah, I should have known that. Because what was involved was that the man answering the question, the one that we'll assume is more conscious, and understood the question, there's no way he can turn around directly and non-intellectually respond to what the person's asking, assuming the person is adequately interested and adequately prepared to hear something. So, in other words, they're still dealing on the basis of man's intellect, without any pejorative connotation of that. That is, they're talking about it. They're talking about, they may be both sitting on the mystical express, and they may be damn close to Istanbul, but they're still sitting there talking at that time. And so since he cannot suddenly take the kid or the interested person and hurl them off the train in the direction, you know, fold them up like Rocky the Squirrel or something and throw them out the window and hurl them physically at Istanbul, at least with any assurance that he'll hit it, I'll put it to you that way. Some people have taken their chances. And there's some walls right outside of Istanbul splattered with certain stains that the local populace have yet to actually ascertain the source of the stains, but I gave you a hint in case you'd like to make your name in small-time anthropology, and assuming they would believe it. So there they sit on the train, and this, let's say, it's this Sufi, this person is more conscious, and somebody comes up and sits next to him, and he asks him a question about such and such. And the guy who knows more, he answers it with no aggression, but it makes the other person laugh, and he had to know it would. The purpose being that they're still dealing with the intellect, as they're talking about Istanbul, no matter what they think they're talking about, no matter what they appear to be talking about from other passengers who may be listening or taking notes. They could be talking about God, Allah, paradise, life after death, karma. They could, no telling what, liberation of the mind, but they're talking about being in Istanbul. The humor is produced when it's done, when it happens, by a struggle, a successful struggle at that level against the predictable. Now, it's easy enough you can make, and by that, let's, you know, the purpose is not to use me as an example because it gets too viscid, the potential, therefore. But things that make you laugh, things I could have said in the last 5 minutes and people laughed after me saying this, you could take the same things and you could put them in the mouth. Very often some of the things I say, you could put it without any real change in the mouth of some comedian somewhere, just one of his lines. I don't mean it would stop the show, and just one of his throwaway lines, some smart-ass ordinary comedian, and he could probably get a laugh out of it, very likely. And so then you could say, well, based on the words, it sounded like you were talking about religion or Mississippi or Norway or whatever. And you could say, well, you know, you could take that and you say it's not no hostility, and yet a ordinary smart-ass, when I'm that, you know, I mean an ordinary comedian, and when he would say it, it would be, he has no choice, it would have a certain amount of criticism to it. There has to be that kind of hostility. Not just on his part. In the whole milieu where he is, there he stands, let's say in a nightclub, and they're all dancing, and not just him, they're being hostile and forcing these poor innocent people that came there and paid money and drinking booze and taking drugs, and that he suddenly forced them to aggressively laugh at religion or women or, you know, some other race or religion. You know, hardly. They all came there to dance. And so if they're going to laugh at it, they're going to take it as being a certain kind of aggression, that we're laughing at somebody. See, that's where it's tricky, because verbally, you didn't lose your place. It's verbally something that not to mean just me, but verbally, we could take something that an old Sufi story, an old Jewish, there are plenty of those good old Jewish stories that used to be thought of as mystical. Now they're thought of, it seems to be more cultural, which is not the point. But I could take them, and still, Henny Youngman or somebody could snap right today and say lines from those same things and get a laugh. But now you should be able to listen and realize under that, no offense to Henny Youngman, a comedian. If you were sitting there listening, you would listen and you realize we're not laughing at that or criticizing that, but you would understand that the reason the people laughed and the reason he thought to say it, the reason life made him think to say this joke, or a writer brought him this joke, and he wrote, well, a one-liner, and it's just taken from some old mystical story. And he says it, and the crowd goes, ha ha, and he goes on to another one. You understand that they verbally, literally, 2 lines, 2 stories, well, a one-liner, let's just say, can serve 2 distinct purposes. The same one-liner, let's say that this writer stole it and gave it to the comedian, and he simply stole it from some old folklore tale, from the 1600s. And he just reading through it, and he pulls out this one line, and the damn comedian, he figures how much intelligence and education he's got, and he brings it in a whole batch of stuff. He got 5 pages of, he's got 100 jokes here, and so they're paying him $10 a joke, or whatever they get nowadays, and the comedian, he's all right, and he pays the guy. He thinks they're all original. He never heard them. And he looks down, and he picks out this one. And it's actually, let's say, a one-liner, just a sentence that was taken, maybe he could take it literally, verbatim from some old mystical-based story. And he got there at a nightclub and go, no, and throw it out, and people, ha, ha, and he goes on to the next one. And they got a laugh. But you understand, under those conditions, nothing's untoward, but under those conditions, they were all dancing a certain kind of, quite ordinary, but a certain kind of always aggressive dance when you're dealing with binary energy. That they're always laughing. All such humor has a certain edge of aggression, of criticism, of cynicism, but of hostility of sorts. So how is it that literally, I could take the same words and then say, but that story originally had no hostility. The man who originally said that, there was no hostility, no criticism, and plus he knew it was going to make the people laugh that heard it, but that wasn't the intention. To get a laugh wasn't his intention. He wasn't a comedian. So then you're left, if you followed all this, to think, well, how in the hell could you ever tell the difference? I mean, where are you going to look? I wasn't going to get that specific, but for instance, I'll tell you. Either go find some of the Sufi writings of Rumi or Joe Miller's original joke book from the 17th. Either one will work. You understand? Did anybody get that? The thing is, you cannot tell the difference at the ordinary level. And why is that? That's easy. Because there is none at the ordinary level. Words are words. Well, all right. Anybody want to write that down? I'll wait a second. That kind of humor, if it is non-aggressive, non-critical of life, in other words, it is outside the mainstream of life, the intent of the person who said it, and it takes 2. I've seen of this more conscious person, more knowledgeable person on the train, and somebody sits down, their dance then is out of the ordinary. And they ask the question, am I right? And he goes, no, 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 and it makes the person go, ha ha. And remember, there's no aggression, and he knew it was going to make them laugh, very likely, but that was not the intent. So what was the intent? If you can't tell from the words, then we're left with this. The intent was the intent. The intent was known only to the intendor, and that's it. But it was specifically, I'll get to something a little more specifically, potentially useful than that. The intent was to struggle against. And I don't mean the guy telling it, because he already knew what he was doing, but it was to encourage the struggle against predictability of thought. If you can ever see it, no matter what you want to call it, we can call it the struggle to be more conscious, the struggle for enlightenment. It could very easily just simply be called the struggle against predictability. That's what it is. If you tried to give that as a centerpiece for some new cult or as a center of a new religion of some sort, a mystical system, I dare say that you would get scant attention. And would you like to take a second and think why? Who would find that of interest? How much interest would you have had in that, I'll ask you rhetorically, years ago? That whatever dreams you may have had, whatever literature you found, whatever groups you tried to chase around, that if you'd run across one somewhere and they said, yes, we're involved with just what you seem to be interested in, and they used whatever terms, I went, yeah, we know. And they said the center of what we're doing is the struggle against predictability. That's obviously non-physically speaking. And they said, that's it. Would you like to, hang around? And you might say, well, I'll go think about it. How long would it take you to think about it? What would you have come up with? You might not have gotten mad or denounced them, but if you went away and you thought, all right, it's all based on the struggle against mental predictability. Do you understand, right to begin with, it's like they invited you to step here, like step into our edifice here, step into our little clubhouse. And as soon as you do, but you see it beforehand, it's not a surprise. Beforehand they say, you're quite welcome, but you see, as soon as they say that, there's a man standing there with a machete at ankle level. They're saying, step right in. And there's no doubt what's going to happen. In fact, if you seriously consider the invitation, you almost feel like, well, they've already got one of my ankles. They at least hit a tendon, because I begin to feel a little shaky. You understand? Because if you say, well, our method, our approach is based upon an intellectual, in the full sense of the word, and so we're talking about the intellect, the higher end of man's nervous system, that which makes man unique. Our whole approach is based upon therein, not physically, but therein, right there specifically, a struggle against the predictable. If you had any smarts at all, you're left with thinking, well, if I got any idea what they're talking about, then I'm being predictable. It just goes on and on and on. There is no way out of that from the ordinary level. If you didn't get the gist of my sergeant of arms or the welcoming committee there at their clubhouse saying, come right in, and there's no secret, you can see him, he's just waiting for you to step over the threshold, right in. He's saying, come in, he's serious, come in, he's smiling, and he's got a machete. And that's obviously going right at your ankles. If you don't really care for that one, you can also say, well, wait a minute, I have stepped into a whole new Zen koan, because there's no way out of it. Oh yeah. But back to the lack of initial appeal. You just think, well, where can I step? Consider how much, from another view, let's drop humor for a second, and back to something I pointed out. From a perhaps more common perspective, from most people's view, if we take this focal point, the central ideas of all the world's major religions, that usually people can boil them down into like one line, the thing about God is love. Or the secret is treat your fellow man, even those who hate you, treat your fellow man as yourself, etc. I described it, or tried to get you to consider it in another way recently, but also can you see that was a total at the time, and it still has a lingering effect. It was a total assault upon predictable thought. Shortly after it said, let's take the love thy, don't just limit that to the idea of Christianity or as a stepchild of Judaism, but just consider all over the world, almost any religion would put up with you saying, well, wouldn't you say that a good Hindu or a good Buddhist would be a man? Would not there be a fair description to say that he would be a man who could love those who are not Hindu or Buddhist or Jewish, the same, in other words, people that even hate him, that he could love them, that he could cherish them as another human, he could love them as much as he does himself or as those of his same kind. And they'll go, yeah, there's no doubt that is not the way we describe it. There's no doubt a true Buddhist, Jew, Christian, etc. would be such a man. Or conversely, that would describe someone. But do realize, shortly after whoever said that, and somebody said it everywhere, shortly after they said that, it was absolutely unpredictable. It was a struggle against the predictable. at the time. It was an assault on the predictable here. But it took a short period of time. I hate to tell you how much, but we're talking about a short period of time. All right. It took that long for it to become publicly popular. Let me just give you some idea to take the historical. It took Christianity, 50 or 60 years or 100 years to become not the forbidden religion of Rome, but the official religion. It was less than 105. But anyway, I'm just giving you one idea. It only took a couple of generations. And that which was forbidden, outlawed, persecuted, was then the required religion. That which was forbidden then became de rigueur. So it took that long for it to become popular. And I'm saying it's all varying degrees, because it could have been in certain neighborhoods of Rome, to carry the allegory further, it might not have taken near that time. But by the time the ordinary began to find it tolerable, by the time the ordinary minds began to find it even interesting and perhaps began to embrace it, what had happened then was the assault on the unpredictable, which was neural to start with, then became translated into what they considered to be an assault on physical predictability. That is, the people, once Christianity, let's go back to that, and this is not a history lesson, as you know, but once Christianity became the state religion, once it became acceptable to the common simple minds of the time and place, they looked upon Christianity then. If we'd have popped up and told them something about the idea you'd heard about all religions start out as a mystical assault on the predictable of its day and time, we could have gotten people there in Rome, circa, whatever it was, 100 A.D., they would go, yeah, that's right, it is. In fact, we triumphed because it took us this long after dear Jesus died and Peter and Paul and all of them, that the state persecuted us. They tried to drive us underground. They forbid us to practice. They wouldn't let us even write our teachings out. But now look, you're right, it wasn't a assault on predictability because we persevered and we overcame them. But it's always physical. Well, take Muhammad and all of the holy wars. There's another great physical example of what I'm talking about. And forget historically whether it actually happened as described, that the assault on the predictable that started out up here, and that was the purpose of a Mohammed, of a Jesus, turning to a group of people and making them laugh. That is, assaulting, dragging them into a dance wherein, when they would follow what he would say, and what he would try to point to, it wasn't the words, but what he was pointing at, they began to engage in an assault on the predictable here, but then by the time they died out, and I guess in the next generation, if it becomes popular, the assault is translated into an assault on the physically predictable, which then becomes, to some degree or another, a civil rebellion, a civil combat, a civil struggle, which is, by my intent, as you know, I mean a physical. And so no matter how they will try to describe history now and reconstruct it, if all religions, just use that, start out as a very limited, non-physical, and certainly non-extra-systemic based religion or belief system, if it starts out as a quite limited dialogue and byplay between one person who happened to stumble across that little area between Ecuador and Pakistan, it starts out as an assault on the intellectual, the neurally predictable. It goes from that, but if it expands, it survives enough for you to hear about it. Then it is translated after the fact. They look back, and it seems as though, and they all talk about it. Well, we had to struggle, but everybody had to struggle. You know, the Muslims could say, well, look back at the great history. We had to struggle against the infidels of our time. Okay, that they were struggling there in 600 A.D. about all these infidels, these other, you go into Mecca, and I don't even know the number anymore, but there were 2,000 gods. But if you talk to the guys that were running each little 2,000 the altar for each little one, or a little booth, like come up here and, give me some money and do that. If you talk to them, hell, it took them a long time that they had to rebel against the 4,000 other gods before then. Do you get the point? Every religion, everything that survives and becomes popular feels as though they were engaged in some kind of combat, that they had to rebel, they had to repeal, they had to correct. It was a new revelation. They have to look at it that way. If it becomes popular, they got no choice. They now see it as it's, even though, again, I repeat, they would not use these words, but I could get a decent, fairly literate theologian in any religion if I said, do you realize that all religions, or your religion, started out as like a struggle against the predictable? And if I got just a little allegorical and he was a little sharp, he'd go, yeah, you're right. That it was the Jews struggling against the Romans and the infidels. And then it was the Christians struggling against that. And then it was Buddha struggling against the Hindu caste system. And they would all go, well, yeah, we don't normally think about that. But you understand, they would see it. They could accept that. And they say, yeah, you're right. It was a struggle against the predictable in the sense that we had a status quo that was either stagnant, misdirected, worshiping the wrong gods, pursuing the wrong beliefs. And we did, our great founder, thank God, pushed it forward. They now see it as a struggle, a successful struggle to some degree, against the physical base predictable. And it's not. But then we're back to, I said, the interesting conundrum. It makes you want to scratch your head and feel like, well, wait a minute, if I step into that, they're going to cut me off at the ankles. But you remember this, if you step into it, you've got to participate. Nobody comes outside the clubhouse and attacks you with that machete. They invite you and you got to step in, so you can't say, well, they cut me off. You got to say, we cut me off. There's a possibility if I step in there, it's just an open invitation. It's just, I'm announcing, hey, it's ankle season, it's open, because they're going to do it to me. And so you can stand there at the door and you can keep asking. Every now and then you can pull back and you can say, is it still a matter if I come in here that what we're going to do is we're going to try and struggle against the predictable? And they go, yep. And they don't say, come on, come on. They just say, yep. And you go, well. But every time you think about it, you are stuck with what? Have we got time for a long, protracted quiz game? No. Even if we did, you don't want to play. You want me to answer it. All right. If you were really sharp, what you get at, and where you cannot hardly stand at, and when you begin to suspect at, that you almost have your own machete, is if you stand back from the door and you go, struggle against the predictable, mentally speaking. It will finally strike those properly attracted to the clubhouse that, well, no matter what I stand here and think, no matter how long I think, no matter if I stand on my head, if I stand with a shaved head, if I stand with a new robe on, everything I'm going to think is predictable vis-a-vis me. Therefore, no matter what I think about this, it's predictable, and by its own definition, has nothing to do with the effort against it. That's when you begin to feel, if you're very good at all, that, wait a minute, I'm not even sure it's necessary that I step inside with them and let them cut me off. I believe that I have just at least done severe damage to one of my own ankles. Because there's no place to stand. The hint for the night, or to try to tie it to last time, you recall I was saying the originality of thought is not a change of thought. It is not taking an opposing view. It is, that's why it can't be described. It's got to be original. And you can't describe original if you know what you're doing. If you were using my term, if we had somebody else that decided, well, I'll make a system out of this. I'll adopt that. I like the idea. And if you went to them, of course, maybe some of you should hope that somebody does pick this up. Because if they do, they'll describe to you in detail what originality of thought is. And then you'll think, well, thank God. You know, he had a pretty good idea, but it's a good thing that some intelligent person got hold of it, because this other place down the streets wanted to explain it. This guy knows. Yeah, I know. I predicted that, did I not? Okay. There is no description of originality of thought except there's no denying it when you do it. It makes you feel as though you've got your head hanging out the train, and that if even if you're not sure how close you are to Istanbul still, you know one thing, every time you do this, it's like the train almost doubled its speed. It makes you want to hang your head. It's like a window with a dog with a German Shepherd, the head the size of a Volkswagen, and that big old tongue goes, That's kind of the way, and it's like wind going through your skull, through your neural system, and the train's gone up to God knows how fast. But I mean, it's whizzing right along to the point that if somebody pulls you back in the window, you just suddenly get yourself back in, and you ask yourself, much less somebody else, but you ask yourself, what were you just thinking with your head out the window? See, you're going to make me say something about that, but some of you already see you laughing. And it means, the easiest thing to say is, it means, I don't know what I was thinking. And that's not true. And you say, well, what was it? All right, I didn't know. But you just said that wasn't true, that you didn't know what you were thinking. Yeah, I know. Well, what were you doing? I saw that look on your face. The look came from, you were temporarily freed from the predictable. And it's almost, as I pointed tonight, that one that gets entangled in this correctly, there's a little humor in it, you might say, that said the one way you can tell a real mystic is he enjoys it. And it said, in fact, it gets to the point that even if he realizes that he's going to fail, he couldn't stop it. If he told himself, well, you should stop this. You're not getting anywhere. See, the humor is that is a complete non sequitur in the midst of that about, even if he saw he was failing. It was kind of a little cheer-up hint to some of you. No, it wasn't, but now we can take it that way. The point is, if you begin to think, I'm not sure I'll ever get there. A real mystic could accept the fact that maybe I'll never get there. But hell, so what? I couldn't stop if I wanted to anyway. I couldn't stop if in my best rational, city-directed moment, say, well, you sometimes think that you won't get there. Yeah? Well, you're an idiot. I mean, anybody rational would just give it up. I mean, if you're pretty convinced, if you have serious doubts, why don't you just stop? And you can think, you're right. That part of my mind, you're right. I should. I'm not. Can't. Just the head out the window, just being freed from the predictability of thought. That kind of wind can actually clear out the head in a manner not normally recognized by neurology or even psychology, much less Amtrak system.